Hello, James of James here, and welcome to the first episode of South Windsor. In this series, we'll use cities' skylines to explore the history and culture of Piedmont, Virginia, from the distant past into the 20th century, trying to understand together how this past shapes our modern society. This episode will focus on the native history and indigenous people of Virginia, the land they lived in, their lifeways, and what daily life would have looked like in Virginia before European arrival. Some may ask, why spend this time on Indigenous history? There are two key reasons, and the first is this. Native Virginians arrived around 20,000 years ago. The first Europeans anywhere nearby were Spanish explorers passing through North Carolina in 1524. Thus, if the whole of human history in Virginia was one 24-hour day, these conquistadors arrived 35 minutes till midnight, at 11:25. Just a few minutes later, at 11:42, the Constitution was ratified and George Washington was sworn in as first president. Since the overwhelming majority of Virginia's history is therefore the story of its native inhabitants, it's clearly both relevant and justified to spend time talking about their lifeways, to recognize and commemorate their ancient heritage in our homeland. The second reason for learning this history is because these indigenous Virginians are still living, some abroad and some here within the Commonwealth's modern borders, and their continued presence is an integral part of the story of our shared home. To understand the native people of Virginia, much of how they lived only makes sense if we understand where they lived. We must examine their physical context, looking at Virginia itself and what defines it as a unique place. At its most basic level, Virginia's geography is determined by two main features: the Appalachian Mountains and the Chesapeake Bay. These two geographic features shape the land between and surrounding them, which in turn impacts what thrives and flourishes there. So, to begin, let's cast our minds into ages far past when these mountains and this bay first formed. 300 million years ago, the central Pangaean Mountains formed as tectonic plates collided. As tall as the Himalayas are today, these mountains would break apart to form the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, the Scottish Highlands, and, incredibly, the Appalachians of eastern North America. 100 million years later, these mountains began to settle, eroding down as the plates drifted apart. River valleys widened into lakes, then opened into seas, eventually growing to form the Atlantic Ocean. These unbelievable geologic changes explain the incredible fossils that can be found in the Appalachian Highlands. Ancient trilobites, corals, and clams. These mountaintops were once sea floors, and the plant and animal life of these prehistoric swamps would someday become the coal seams that would characterize so much of the region's economy. 35 million years ago, a fireball appeared in the sky. Brighter than most meteors, it grew in size and intensity as it flew above dense, tropical rainforests that would later be known as Richmond, Virginia. The bolide would fly over the broad delta of the Susquehanna River and head out to sea before crashing into the shallow waters of the Atlantic continental shelf. The epicenter of the impact was very close to the port town of Cape Charles on Virginia's eastern shore, as shown in this dramatic recreation.
Astrologists report that a devastating meteor will strike the city in the near future. Residents should seek shelter immediately if any is available. A meteor strike has occurred. Avoid the impact site and head to shelter if any is available.
Two things to note about this demonstration. First, this map obviously shows modern coastlines and fields. This whole area would have been under the salt water of the Atlantic, as sea levels were considerably higher at the time. Secondly, while mods allowed me to use a meteor 2.5 times larger than the maximum size allowed in the vanilla game, the crater would have to be 15 times larger still to reach the approximate size of the real-life Chesapeake Bay impact. The crater would form the basin of the Chesapeake Bay out of the delta of the Susquehanna River, which drained into what became the bay from the north. Thus, with the mountains in the west and the bay in the east, the geography of Virginia began to take on a more recognizable shape. Beginning in the east, rivers running down from the mountains emptied into the Chesapeake, eroding away a broad, coastal plain covered by rich, fertile soils. This plain, often called the Tidewater, extends westward to the fall line, the limit of easy navigation along much of the mid-Atlantic coast. This is less of a single hard edge, but more a narrow band where rivers drop between 50 to 30 meters in a short distance. On the James River, this band is approximately 7 miles of urban rapids overlooked by the city of Richmond, where a disused system of canals and locks used to navigate around the falls can still be seen. Many other major cities across Virginia and other mid-Atlantic states were similarly situated at the fall line. Princeton, New Jersey, Wilmington, Delaware, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Columbia, South Carolina, and Augusta, Georgia, are all similarly situated on the fall lines of their rivers. Above the fall line lies the next main regional division, the Piedmont, where our series will be set. As the land rises to meet the Appalachians, it gradually increases in roughness and elevation as the coastal plain gives way to the foothills that give the region its name. The bedrock here is more complex, weathered, and diverse, leading to a wide variety and quality of local soils across the increasingly rugged terrain. Historically, farms in this region have been smaller and have had to work around the topography of the land compared to the sprawling, flat estates that formed in the Tidewater region of the coast. Compared to the mountains above, the rocks here are highly eroded and very few outcrops will protrude from the soil. Last, we come to the mountains and highland plateaus. The first ridge lines a traveler heading west would encounter are called the Blue Ridge, so called because of the blue tint they take on when viewed from a distance through the humid Piedmont air. Here, the power of geologic forces are on full display. Sharp knife ridges such as Seneca Rocks and impressive formations such as the Natural Bridge are found alongside ancient mountains and the waters of the New River Gorge, inaptly named as it's one of the oldest rivers on Earth. Compared to the Rockies, Alps, or Himalayas, this range is far shorter, generally around 4,000 feet or 1,200 meters, but this is primarily due to their age compared to these relatively younger formations. Across the Blue Ridge lies the Shenandoah, an ancient, fertile valley which provided easy passage from as far north as Quebec and as far south as Alabama. Its mountainsides feature caverns and hot mineral springs bubbling up, with underground rivers carving the soft sandstone and other sedimentary rock into a lovely and bountiful landscape, well loved by its many visitors and inhabitants. From this valley, the land rises again into a series of ridgelines, eventually reaching a rugged plateau in what is now West Virginia.